we do have a couple of crazy weeks when it does come to professional wrestling, and as I have received some messages, I thought I would just use this moment to explain it to you, even though it is nice and simple. AEW Dynamite for the next couple of weeks, and maybe on some other occasions, is moving to Friday nights, which just means on Saturdays, for a while, you will see this bald head when we up those downs for SmackDown, and then you'll see it again when we up those downs for AEW Dynamite. You're just gonna get sick of this, as I and my family are sick of it every single day, but you will learn to cope. But don't worry about that. That's in the future. Maybe aliens are going to come down tomorrow and go pew pew and kill us all. You'll be like, oh, why was I fretting over that? Also, not something to fret about anyway. But for now, Impact did have a wrestling show. Let's take this, the finger of power, and give the good bits an up, and obviously give the bad bits a down. There was a lot of Eric Young saying violent by design to start this week's episode of Impact. And I was a little bit like, yeah, I get it, Eric. That's the name of your group. Although to be fair, it's kind of what Triple H used to do with Evolution as well. He couldn't get through one sentence without just going, hee Evolution. However, that faction are great at the moment. I'm overjoyed that they have become the tag team champions, and probably on a low-key level, they are one of the best stables in professional wrestling right now. So if Impact is going to highlight them more and give them that fabled push, I'm 100% behind it. Sami Callihan was then out to discuss recent events that have been going down, and he is super duper angry at Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers and the Elite in general, because ever since they came to his company, they've been running amok and basically messing up his house. He kept it nice and simple and told Kenny to get his ass out here right now, but of course this is a wrestling show, and he didn't get the person he did ask for, and quite terrifying for him instead, he got Moose. Given that he is the number one contender, Moose didn't like this chat at all, and he told Sami Callihan, you better take a step back and get off my feet. And then before he could say anything else, out came the Good Brothers, because once again it's a wrestling show in 2021. They even tried to play some mind games here by going, yeah, Sami, we agree with Moose, but because Moose is the best person on the planet, he said, you two shut your holes as well. And then from nowhere, Sami Callihan and Moose basically chased them off, so you went, oh my gosh, maybe they're going to work together. Spoiler, that was not the case. This also tied into the ongoing storyline between Scott D'Amore and Don Callis, because Callis was in the back and he was like, oh, hey boys, how's it going? How about tonight we have a tag team main event of you two versus those two who did just chase you away? And everyone was like, well, how are you able to do this? And Don Callis made it very clear, well, I am an executive, and last week Scott D'Amore told me to do more, so here I am doing just that. Although clearly this isn't 100% above board, because Scott D'Amore then did walk into the frame and it's a bit like, what you doing, brah? And Don was like, oh, I think I left my keys in my car, I better go. But either way, we are going to get that. This was a fine start, easy to watch, set up the show, giving it up. Also, because Moose has now arrived on this week's episode of Ups and Downs, I had an epiphany over the last 7 days. How the hell is he called Moose, but he comes across as the most serious dude ever? That just proves how good he is right now. I mean, he's called Moose. It would be like me coming on here and saying, my name's Horse, and you'd all laugh at me because I'm a buffoon. Next up was Fallah Bahh teaming with his old friend TJP to take on Josh Alexander and Petey Williams. And here's the thing. This was a decent tag match and had some entertaining spots, including Fallah Bahh trying to do a kip-up and failing miserably. But I don't get why the X Division title and a random tag team match have just been smushed together. It also hasn't really been built that way, so you couldn't invest in it emotionally. And also it ended with TJP hitting the Mamba Splash onto Josh Alexander, and do not forget he is the X Division champion, which led the commentators to go, well, I guess that's going to have to be a future X Division title match. So that is a weird way to get there, but also we have seen TJP versus Josh Alexander a lot, and I would just like some new contenders to be thrown into the mix. So because of all of that, I just thought it was a bit confusing and it's getting it down. However, just to speed forward to what happened later, Impact Wrestling did turn the tide a little bit, because Scott D'Amore said, hey, I've got an idea. I would love to see you wrestle forever, but that's quite literally impossible. So next week, you guys can have an Iron Man match. But the first part is going to be on BTI, which is the Impact pre-show, and then when the Impact show for real starts, you'll be halfway through and the fans can join us for the finale. Now that is a little bit weird, because if you forget about this, you're just going to turn on Impact, it's going to sound like 4-2 in somebody's favour, but it is different and it did get me excited, and hopefully Josh Alexander does win and then we can move on to Pastors New. We then had another interview with W. Morrissey, and he essentially took the dial and he turned it up to that cliched 11. We've also started to blur the lines here as well, because Morrissey told G and Miller the reason he is so pissed off now is because he thinks the wrestling industry stinks. When it comes to face-to-face interactions, everyone's like, oh man, I love you, you're the best, but behind your back, they will take a fake knife and stick it right in your back. He had an example for this too, because look what happened when he did suffer that seizure on the independent scene. All of these fans who should have been calling 911 instead whipped out their camera phones and they filmed him and they laughed. And look, some people did do that, but I would make it clear I would never do something like that. I thought it was pretty bad. He had more proof too, because ever since he had walked into the Impact locker room and started to make something of his life again, all of a sudden everybody wanted to be his buddy, but where were they when he was at his lowest point? So he is really using stuff that happened in reality to work into his character, and it's going so well. And then Gia Miller just wound him up, and she was like, oh, actually, I've been here a while, and there's loads of friends and loads of buddies in the locker room, so maybe the problem is just you. She also mentioned that Willie Mack and Rich Swann were pals, and W. Morrissey didn't want to hear that because he hates them, so he snapped and essentially said, oh yeah, well, I'm going to kill everybody, and what are you going to do about it, because look how tall I am, and as somebody once said, you can't educate me in that area. It didn't end very well for him, because Rich Swann used this moment to jump him to get his revenge about what happened last week, but this was kind of freaky-deaky, but it was also really good. W. Morrissey is coming across like an absolute nut job. This may very well be the best character that the former Big Cass has ever done. That's why I'm giving it an up. We then went straight into another backstage interview, which we probably shouldn't have done, but we were about to have a 10 women's tag team match, which was meant to be featuring Taylor Wilde, but nobody could find where she'd gone. As that was the case, Tenille Dashwood kind of became the captain here and said, well, we got to replace her with somebody, when Rachel Ellering piped up, well, I've got a great idea. Why don't we bring in Jordynne Grace? This was an absolutely terrible idea, because right now Grace is having a massive confidence problem, so she was like, oh great, you didn't want me first time round, so now I'm just a second choice. She did have a point. We then zoomed into that though, where it was these three teaming up with Rosemary and Havoc to take on Deonna Purrazzo, Fire and Flavor, Kimberly and Susan. And this just had so many layers when it came to storyline, and the tag team match was decent. I'm giving it an up. The only problem was, guess who took a massive beatdown during all this? That's right, it was Jordynne Grace. I mean, we need to get her back on a nice little platform, and at the moment we're just running her into the ground. She escaped eventually and basically kind of accidentally fell into a tag courtesy of Rosemary, and while she did run wild for a little bit, she was then getting beaten up too. It meant we needed another hot tag, which came just after Havoc had gone, well, who cares about the rules, and she had got in the ring to help with the Tower of Doom spot. But of course, it did go to Rachel Ellering, and I bet on the outside, Jordynne Grace was, damn it, I can't stand this person, and sooner or later, she's gonna snap. And to be fair to Grace, there were moments where she did team with Ellering, so maybe we're not quite there just yet. But then, of course, the tag team klaxon, sounded, which meant everybody knew, we can now get in the ring, and they all started hitting their big moves, because sports entertainment. It was our champion that had the worst of this though, because Rosemary got the tag, she got in there, hit that weird like ass bomb thingamajig finishing move, and she got the 1, 2, 3, which means there ain't no two ways about it. She absolutely has to challenge for that belt at against all odds. We really did achieve a lot here though, and it was quite enjoyable, although yes, if you want to make a slight critique, you could go, wait a minute, Josh Alexander got pinned, he's a champion, and then Deonna Purrazzo got pinned and she's a champion. Why didn't we separate this out over a couple of weeks? Well, we didn't, and to be honest, it didn't really bother me. Impact Wrestling then ran a video they should have run weeks ago, because it was focused on Jake Something and Rohit Raju and gave you all of the story and all the clarity and all the emotion you needed to go, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're fighting. They used to be such good friends. They did talk about how they were buddies on the indie scene, and when Rohit Raju got hired to Impact, the first person he called was Jake Something, and how overjoyed he was when Something also got hired. But then look at everything that's happened since then. Scott D'Amore was like, oh, Jake Something, we love you, whereas Rohit Raju, he doesn't get nothing. And Scott D'Amore kind of hates it. Jake retorted that Raju has just let all the success get to his head, which is what broke their unbreakable bond, and they both kind of challenged each other to a tables match. That was a bit weird. I was like, did you have a discussion beforehand, or are you just desperate to throw the other person through some wood? But this has kind of been meandering for a little bit. I didn't understand why they were having a fight, but now I do know, plus I'm gonna get some tables. Honestly, again, Impact, you should do this for all of your programs. It was very well executed, and it's getting it up. Violent by Design came to the ring next, and they kind of did exactly what they've been doing at the start of the show. But again, I really like them. Eric Young just put over his whole crew and explained why he did recruit them and why they're going to take over the world. And again, was basically like, hello, my name is Eric Young Design. This is Rhino Design. Oh, look, it's Cody Deaner Design. And it's Joe Drawing Design. He just loves throwing the name into sentences. He also told us that he's been planning for ages to cash in on the tag team champions to win these tag team titles, because Finn Juice were not only going to be at their weakest, but now they can't have a rematch because they're not in the US and they've flown back to Japan. So all of this really was by design. Sorry. He then threatened to take over the entire world and said they are going to go to Mexico and they're going to go to Japan. And as soon as he said that word, the lights went out and you could just smell that something was cooking. Of course, it wasn't The Rock. I shouldn't have used that phrase. At least one person now is going to go, oh my gosh, it was Dwayne Johnson. But it was Kojima, he of New Japan fame, and Kojima just kicks all the ass. And he got in the ring, and he said against all odds, meaning he is going to face one of these fools at the pay-per-view. And again, just to spool forward, it is going to be Joe Doring, and those two have kicked the holy hell out of each other back in the past. I tell you, that will be a sleeper hit right there, and it's getting it up. We then had the most flubbed up promo courtesy of Brian Myers. Because of course last week he had grabbed Matt Cardona's head and chucked it into a wall, and as a doctor was telling us, Matty is now going to be out for 12 weeks. And at that point, Myers just walked through another door and he said, it's only 12 weeks. What can I do to basically end him permanently? From nowhere, Sam Beale then interrupted, and we haven't seen him in ages, and he'd seemed really upset about this. And while Brian Myers thought about punching him in the face, instead he said, look at you. You're an absolute goober. You need to be a professional. And given that I am a professional, I'm going to teach you. So I suppose that's his new protege. I don't really know. I'm gonna have to see how this pans out, because to be honest with you, I was thinking about the fact that we had just seen a man threatened by death. We also had a backstage clash between Cody Deaner and Crazy Steve, because Steve basically went, look at you, Cody Deaner. You're always in somebody's shadow. Before it was Jake something, now it's these guys. And just to cut a long story short, we are teasing that they're going to enter themselves the tag team feud, which also ties into our next match. Because it was Hernandez and Johnny Swinger teaming up to take on Decay, and all of this happened because of what went down last week on Swingers Palace. And I know I say it all the time, but I have to be honest with you, anything that happens on Swingers Palace, I don't understand, and then matches and angles just seem to manifest themselves from there. But Steve and Black Taurus had been kicked out of the gambling house, so of course when that happens, you apparently have to go and get your revenge in a wrestling ring. I do get it though, we need to set up the fact that Decay are going to go after the tag team championships, which now belong to Violent by Design. So they basically ran through Hernandez and Johnny Swinger, and they got the kind of squash match pin 1, 2, 3. Taurus took Swinger out with a dive, which allowed Crazy Steve to hit Deep Impact on Hernandez, and this was nice and simple, and I suppose that will be a decent tag team match. Giving it up. It was at our main event next, but we sprinkled some salt onto this steak before we got into the meat and bones, because we saw Don Callis talking to Gallows and Anderson, and he said, look, here's why I made the match, here's the plan. You have to get in between these two and make them hate each other, because obviously, long term, that's going to help the savior of all, Mr. Kenny Omega. As it turned out though, there was no need to try and set any of this up, because almost instantly, Sami Callihan and Moose were just tagging in and tagging out, even though the other person didn't want them to, because they wanted to be the star. These guys already hate each other. It allowed Gallows to take over and just beat Sami Callihan up for ages, to the point he was like, damn it, I'm gonna have to tag in Moose. And of course, when Moose got in there, he did his thing because he's flipping Moose. But then Sami Callihan, what was he thinking? Decided, oh no, wait, I don't like this. So he tagged himself back in. Unsurprisingly, Moose decided he was done with this because it was a giant waste of his time, so he booted Sami right in the head, left, which allowed Gallows and Anderson to hit the Magic Killer, and they got the win, as Moose kind of just looked on like, well, what did you expect, you absolute piece of trash. We were not done though, or at least Moose wasn't done, because he then came back to the ring and he hit Sami Callihan with the lights out spear. Now it does kind of feel like these two are going to derail any plans for an Impact wrestler to win back the Impact Championship and bring it back to the show, but I don't care, because once again, crossing the streams, making sure one storyline flows into the other storyline, and when Moose does meet Kenny Omega, surely Sami Callihan is going to do something stupid. We don't know, we have to watch to find out, and that's why it's getting it up. I would like Moose to become champion though. At some stage, I think he's earned it, and I think he's developed so well over the last 12 months, he deserves some kind of coronation ceremony. And when it comes to Impact, once again, nice and easy, no problems with me, and overall it gets it up. Now please do leave a comment below and let us know what you thought about last night's Impact. Like the video, share the video, and hit that subscribe button, it's free. Head over to WhatCulture.com where you can keep up to date with wrestling. Come say hello on social media and click a video around my head. Stay on the channel, YouTube loves it and so do I. My name is Simon from WhatCulture, thank you for tuning in as always, and again, tomorrow we'll up those downs for Dynamite, we'll up those downs for SmackDown, and we'll just have a terrific old day, or maybe one, I don't know. I can't see into the future.